Installing DecksDirect's Frontier glass balusters. I made this video to help you understand how to install the Frontier glass balusters. The DecksDirect's video was accurate to figure out how many balusters I needed, but it was pretty technical and it did not help me figure out how to actually install them. I had a large old deck with wood lattice balusters that were rotting out and were hard to paint and replace. I had used these glass balusters on a deck before. I had built at our old house 15 years ago. They worked great. My wife loved them and wanted them for our present house. I had two problems at this house. One is the posts weren't high enough for the code, and the distance between the rails and posts varied considerably. I had to add 8 inches to each post using a lap joint technique. There are some very good videos here on YouTube to teach you how to do this. My problem is that I was confused after watching the deck baluster count and spacing video on DecksDirect. You want the baluster spacing to look even. I took the information and began making a drawing for each different rail length, making the drawings to make sure in my own mind that it would look all right, as they were pretty expensive. I did these drawings while I was waiting the week to 10 days it takes to ship them. That way I knew that I could start installing them without having to figure out the spacing. I just looked at the drawings that I had made when I started. So this was my procedure. First, I measured the space between each post and got the number of inches. Then I added the width of the baluster, 4 inches, and the space you want between each baluster, less than 4 inches, to meet code and prevent kids and animals from getting their heads caught in between, and get another number, a unit, around 7 1/4 inches if you use 3 1/4 inches between the 4-inch balusters. How many units are there between the distance between the posts? Divide the length between the posts by the number of units. In this one rail section, it was 95 1/2 inches between the posts. There are 13 units, or 7 1/4 into 7 1/2 length, with 5 inches left over. You will normally get a number with the remainder. If it is an odd number of units, you start by putting your first baluster exactly in the middle. You find the middle by measuring with a tape. I made a little jig, a piece of wood, the exact space between the balusters, and used it when actually installing the balusters. The rails that needed an odd number of baluster spacer units meant putting the first baluster directly in the middle, so you have the same number of units on either side of that middle baluster. If the number of units you calculate is even, then you need a space in the middle. Then you can use the spacer to put a baluster on either side of that middle space. The rule is, if you need an odd number of baluster units, a glass baluster goes directly in the middle. If you need an even number of baluster units, an empty space goes in the middle, then an even number of units on either side. Once you get the middle figured out, the rest is easy, using this jig for spacing and making sure that the balusters are installed as perfectly vertical and level as possible. I would mark and install the baluster first and then use the jig to get the others the correct space. A word of caution and explanation: the drawings helped me make sure I had an acceptable amount of space at each post, as the space between the last baluster and the post varied a little on each length of railing. If it is not right or unacceptable to you, you have to start making adjustments, adding or subtracting balusters, if it's a lot, or adding or subtracting a bit of space between the balusters. My main spacing was 3 1/4 inches, but I had 2 stretches that needed a bit more space between each baluster so that it looked okay approaching the post. I did make a second jig of 3 1/2 inches. Truth is, most people look at the middle, where the spacing must be perfect, which is why I made a standard jig and less at the posts, but it should not stand out too much. Once I got the really well-packed glass balusters, the first thing you need to do is install the rubber grommets. It took a few hours, as I had almost 500 grommets to install. I used a Phillips screwdriver to quickly force them into the holes. The glass is fairly tough, and I was very careful. The screws and grommets came with the balusters, so when it came time to install the balusters, I just followed my 12 drawings, putting either a space or a baluster in the very middle. I used a screwdriver that had a high torque but a fairly slow speed to put in the screws so as not to break the glass by doing it too tightly. The grommets help make sure nothing bad happens. I made sure there was some looseness to accommodate heat and coolness. The balusters are beautiful, unusual, and really open up the deck so that we can see the wildlife and wildflowers. We love the glass balusters we had at the old house and believe these will last the rest of our lives as we enjoy seeing the natural beauty from inside and out. I hope this video helps fill out the missing details if you are going to install a deck with these gorgeous tempered glass balusters from Frontier and DecksDirect.